The air of Birmingham had never been cleaner, and I swear I could smell death long before it arrived. 1919. The war had ended, but the streets still bled from it. The factories coughed smoke into the gray sky, and the pubs echoed with men trying to forget. But nothing, not the war, not the influenza, not the goddamn police had prepared us for what came next. My name's Arthur Ashe. Shelby, not Tommy. Tommy would have called it destiny. I call it survival. I walk the streets with my brothers close, eyes sharp, razor blades stitched into caps like the others. But this apocalypse was something no man could plan for. It started in the north, reports of people clawing at each other. But they said it was the Spanish flu. By the time it reached Birmingham, I'd seen a man I knew, a butcher on Small Heath Lane, rise from his coffin and try to eat his own wife. That's when I realized the world wasn't ending in silence. It was ending in screams. I was on a usual run that day, collecting debts, checking the markets, ensuring the PEAKY names still held weight. Markets were quiet. Factories were deserted. Smoke hung low like a funeral shroud. I had my revolver tucked inside my coat, my brass knuckles ready, and my brothers beside me. John, the loyal lunatic. Finn, the quiet shadow. Ada was safe, for now, running errands like a ghost. But loyalty only takes you so far when the dead can crawl. I remember the first scream. High, piercing, echoing between the brick walls like an alarm. I dropped to my knees behind a cart of barrels, glass crunching under my boots. John cursed, drawing his gun. "What the fuck is that?" I peeked over the barrels. A man staggered through the alley, jerking, skin pale, eyes milky white. A woman screamed, and he lunged at her like a predator, and teeth tore through flesh. I shot him point blank. The head cracked, a hollow sound that didn't satisfy me. He fell, convulsing, but the look in his eyes stayed. We didn't talk much on the way back to the garrison. Fear wasn't polite. Fear was a tool, like the edge of a blade. By the time we reached the pub, the place was crawling with whispers and shadows. Men who once controlled dice games now hid under tables. Women barred the windows, and outside, something moved in the fog. I knew one thing. Rules had changed. You couldn't trust men anymore, not in this city. We fortified the pub, barricades, knives, Molotovs, improvised from the back storeroom. It was like preparing for war, only this was a war with the dead, and the living had already proven themselves weaker. That night, the screams came closer. I remember standing at the window, smoke curling from my lips, revolver in hand, staring at shadows that weren't quite human. They shuffled, snarled, moved like the dead but with cunning. We weren't just fighting instinct. These things learned. "Ash," John whispered behind me, "they're circling." I didn't reply. Words were wasted breath. I lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly, and watched. The first one came over the broken fence, shoulders hunched, hands like claws. It smelled of rot, death, and something I couldn't name. I fired, one shot, straight through the forehead. It didn't flinch, didn't scream, just fell forward. I realized something crucial then. Bullets weren't enough. We were no longer just gangsters. We were hunters, predators, in a city that had become a graveyard. We fought through the night, makeshift weapons, knives hidden in coats, the occasional shot from the revolver. By dawn, the streets were silent. silent except for the wet, echoing groans that lingered in the fog like a warning. I stepped outside. The city was different, empty, and I knew, deep down, this wasn't just another skirmish. This was a war, and the rules weren't written by men anymore. We needed a plan, supplies, weapons, shelter. The garrison wasn't enough for long. But I also knew that trust was a currency more dangerous than gold. John and Finn were loyal, yes, but the rest of the city, everyone else, they would kill you to survive. And when the dead came, they wouldn't hesitate either. I lit another cigarette, staring at the horizon where the factories used to hum. Smoke still rose from a few abandoned chimneys. But something else lingered in the air. The red fog. I could feel it crawling closer, and I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The first dawn after the attack wasn't a dawn at all. It was a gray smear across the sky, like the city itself was bruised. The fog hadn't lifted. In fact, it had thickened, curling through the streets like a living thing. I could smell rot on the wind, taste it in the air, and hear the faint scratching of the dead just beyond the alleyways. John and Finn stayed close. We moved like shadows through small heath, inspecting the streets, the markets, the factories. Most buildings were empty, doors swung loose, but some had survivors hiding in attics and basements. They looked at us like we were devils themselves, but I knew better. Fear made people weak, and weak people were liabilities. We took control quickly. The garrison wasn't enough. We needed barricades, scouts, weapons, supplies. I made a list in my head. Every gun, every bit of ammo, every bottle of kerosene, every knife that could be sharpened. Then I marked the exits and entrances. I calculated patrols. I divided the city into zones: safe, risky, and lethal. Lethal was everywhere, but it helped to name it. We struck first at the butcher shop on Small Heath Lane, the same one I'd seen rise from the grave. 2 zombies inside, 1 shot to the head each. No hesitation. Then we cleared the nearby streets of wandering dead, moving in quick, precise strikes. The living would understand fear. The dead didn't. By the time night came, we had our first stronghold, the old foundry near the canal. It had high walls, narrow entrances, and a stockpile of iron pipes and steel rods, perfect for impromptu weapons. I let John and Finn patrol the perimeter while I checked the interior. Ada appeared with a satchel of supplies she'd scavenged. She'd always been clever, but clever in silence, a trait I respected. "You think we can hold this place?" John asked, leaning against the wall, eyes wide but burning with adrenaline. I exhaled smoke from my cigarette. "We don't hold it. We control it. The difference matters, John. You hold something, it can be taken. You control something, it bends to your will. And this city bends to whoever's smart enough to take it." That night, we held our first council. A few survivors, traders, street rats, a doctor who claimed he could fix bullet wounds and bite wounds, joined us. I laid out the rules. Loyalty comes first. Betrayal is death. No wandering alone, ever. Fight, kill, survive. Some nodded, some cried, some tried to bargain. I cut them short. Bargain all you want. The dead don't care, and neither do I. Sleep came in fragments. The dead didn't rest. We'd hear scratching, moans, the occasional scream that would cut through the fog. And every time I stepped outside, every time I looked at the streets, I calculated how far could they reach, how quickly could they learn. It was John who spotted them first. A group 6 of them, moving in staggered formation. Not random, not mindless, coordinated. They paused, sniffed the air, and advanced. "They've learned," I said, voice low. Finn didn't respond. He just loaded his revolver. We engaged. It was a slaughter. Fire, knives, a baseball bat I'd sharpened for this very day. The dead fell, heads crushed, throats slit, but still, something about them was wrong. Their eyes tracked us differently. Their movements were faster, smarter. This wasn't the same horror as last night. This was evolution. By dawn, we'd survived, but barely. John had a gash across his shoulder. Finn had a bruise on his ribs. I had a knife cut along my cheek that burned like fire. And yet, we were alive. That's when I knew something essential. To survive, we had to think like predators, not like men. The next days blurred into a rhythm of scavenging, fortifying, and fighting. Every building had to be checked, every street cleared, every survivor interrogated. I became ruthless, precise, cold but necessary. People whispered my name. Fear was a tool. Then came the first betrayal. It wasn't violent, at least not yet. A trader named Milligan approached with a group of others, claiming they'd found a safe route out of the city, beyond the canal, where zombies hadn't reached. They asked for our protection in exchange for passage. I listened, cigar smoke curling from my lips, eyes sharp. "I don't do charity," I said finally, "and I don't trust your words. Survival doesn't work on promises. Show me the route, or die where you stand." They hesitated. I could smell it. Fear, yes, but also greed. I let them go, for now, but I made sure to remember their faces. And if they betrayed us, well, Birmingham had plenty of alleys with no witnesses. That night, I walked the walls of the foundry, watching the fog curl over the canal. A small group of the dead wandered below, but they weren't organized like the others. Not yet. Yet in their movements, I could see patterns, smarter, faster. I exhaled smoke into the night and realized I had plans, big plans, and to survive, I needed more than fear. I needed respect, loyalty, and blood on my hands before the night ended. Birmingham was changing. The rules had changed, and I intended to bend them all to my will. By the third week, Birmingham was no longer a city. It was a battlefield, a graveyard, and a chessboard, all at once. The factories had fallen silent, and the canals ran black and stagnant. Smoke curled from ruins, where fires had been set to purge infected blocks. But we survived, we adapted, and I made sure everyone knew whose hand held the knife in this game. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't Tommy Shelby. I was Ash Shelby, a bastard made of calculation, fire, and instinct. And I had a plan. The foundry became our fortress. Walls reinforced with iron bars scavenged from collapsed factories. Trenches dug around the perimeter. Molotovs stacked at each entrance. We moved like ghosts, patrolling at night, scavenging during the day, always watching, always listening. Finn had become silent as a shadow, his eyes scanning corners for any movement. John had grown sharper, his lunacy tempered by necessity. And Ada, she was a ghost among them, slipping through the fog to bring intelligence from other survivors, unseen and untouchable. The dead had learned. The group I'd seen before, the 6 I'd killed, wasn't an anomaly. They started coordinating attacks, testing our defenses, finding weak points. I learned quickly they were drawn to noise, movement. So we became quieter. We also learned the living were just as dangerous. Milligan and his gang had tried to sneak past our barricades at night. I didn't even raise my voice. I watched, waited. The fog worked in my favor. When they stepped into the open, I moved. A shot to the knee, a slash across a throat. Silence. The rest scattered into the night, and they didn't return. One night, as I patrolled the perimeter alone, I saw something I hadn't before. A zombie, standing still on the canal bank, its head tilted, watching, not like the others. It wasn't moving blindly. It was waiting, studying, calculating. I lit a cigarette, inhaled slowly, and whispered to the wind, "You're learning." The fog made everything uncertain. Shapes emerged, dissolved, reformed. But I had my eyes, my mind, and my reflexes. And soon, I began hunting, not just to survive, but to dominate. I scouted buildings for supplies, seized abandoned horses and carts, and brought other survivors under my command, not because I was noble, but because I needed allies who understood the rules. Obedience and survival at any cost. Then came the fire at the textile mill. We saw it from the foundry walls, flames licking the sky like a beacon of death. The mill was full of survivors, trapped, screaming, and the dead? A horde, larger than anything we'd seen, moving as if herded by a single mind. I knew we couldn't save everyone, but some we could. I didn't hesitate. John, Finn, and I moved in. Smoke burned our eyes. Heat blistered our hands. The dead clawed at walls, windows, anything they could reach. I shot, slashed, kicked, and cursed, my body moving on instinct. We dragged survivors out, pushed them into carts, and fought through a corridor of screams and rot. It was chaos, beautiful, deadly. By the time the fire was contained and the horde driven off, I had new recruits, hardened survivors, who'd seen my hand in the battle and understood the rules without being told. I started giving orders, patrols, food runs, barricade reinforcements. We moved like soldiers, but we weren't soldiers. We were something more, something new. The dead were learning, yes, but so were we. Faster, smarter, stronger. The biggest lesson came when we discovered a pack of dead moving in formation along the canals. Not staggering, not blind. They were hunting, working together, and they were fast. Faster than any man. By the fourth week, the fog had become a constant. It rolled through Birmingham like a tide, red-tinted in the dawn light, curling between brick walls and over broken cobblestones. The dead weren't just roaming anymore, they were hunting. Not aimlessly, they moved with purpose, sniffing fear, learning, adapting. And the living, they were just as dangerous. Word spread fast in a city stripped bare of law. Other gangs had realized what was happening, what we were building at the foundry, and they weren't pleased. They came with torches and guns, demanding tribute, protection, or allegiance. I watched them from the walls, cigar smoke coiling around my face. Their eyes flickered with fear, sure, but also greed. Misplaced greed. I gave the order, meet them. Not in friendship, not in negotiation, in fire. The leader of the rival gang, a man called Kavanaugh, strutted up to the barricade with a dozen men, guns in hand, leather coats flapping, faces scarred and ugly. "Ash Shelby," he called, voice carrying over the fog. "Hand over your stock. Join us, or die." I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile, and flicked ash from my cigarette. "Kavanaugh," I said, voice calm, deliberate. "I don't die when men like you threaten me. I make men like you disappear. Choose your lesson." The fog swirled. The horde in the canal seemed to sense the tension, a low moan rising in the distance like a chorus of warning. I moved first. A single shot from the revolver cracked the silence, catching one of Kavanaugh's men in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. Fire met gunpowder. Iron pipes swung. The dead, drawn by noise, converged from the canal, joining the battle like an unholy army. John and Finn were beside me, fists and knives cutting through attackers and infected alike. Ada ran like a phantom, pulling survivors out of the line of fire, disappearing into smoke and shadows. Every move was calculated, every kill precise. By the end, the streets were soaked in blood, human and dead alike. Kavanaugh lay broken, a knife at his throat, trembling. I let him live only because he understood fear, and fear was useful. Go, I said. Tell every gang in Birmingham that the ash rules here, and the dead obey my rules or they'll tear you apart. He didn't need convincing. He ran. But victory never tastes clean. I decided we needed more intelligence. Scouting parties were sent, moving in silence through ruined streets, reporting positions, numbers, and behaviors of the horde. Ada's network brought information from other survivors, small clusters of organized living and terrifying undead congregations forming along old railway lines. It became clear this wasn't just an outbreak. This was evolution. I called a council. Survivors huddled around, tired, bloodied, frightened. I didn't sugarcoat it. They learn, they adapt, and if we don't get smarter, they'll take this city and everyone in it. That includes you, that includes me. They nodded, some with fear, some with respect, some with silent determination. I didn't care which, only that they understood the rules, adapt or die. Then came the betrayal I'd been waiting for. Milligan, the traitor who'd once begged for protection, had slipped past our walls again. He thought he could sneak supplies and intel out of the city to some rival gang. I found him in the alley near the old textile mill, half drunk, muttering apologies. His eyes widened when I stepped from the shadows, brass knuckles glinting in the fog. "You thought you could cheat me?" I asked, calm, controlled. He stammered. I didn't let him finish. One strike to the jaw, and he crumpled. I dragged him back to the foundry. By the time John and Finn arrived, I'd made the decision. He talks to the dead, or he dies like them. The interrogation revealed the rival gang's plans, their weaknesses, and a horrifying truth. The dead were gathering, not randomly, not in hordes, but in packs, forming what looked like nests along the outskirts, concentrating near water, near factories, near hospitals. Their intelligence was rising. I crushed the cigarette in my palm. The city was ours, but not entirely. And I realized that the dead weren't the only enemy. Humans, weak, greedy, desperate humans, were just as dangerous, perhaps more so. By the 5th week, I had grown accustomed to the red fog curling over Birmingham like a living predator. It wasn't just an omen anymore, it was a hunting ground. And I had decided it was time we stopped reacting. We would strike, we would hunt, we would take the fight to them. The foundry had become a fortress, but even fortresses can crumble. The dead had been probing our defenses every night, learning our patrols, exploiting blind spots. I called a council of survivors, the strongest, the smartest, the ones who had proven themselves. "We're going out," I said, voice calm, deliberate. "We're taking the canals, the factories, and the hospitals. Wherever they gather, we hunt and we kill. Every one of them. Nothing left standing." There was a murmur, but no objection. Fear had taught them obedience. Respect had taught them discipline. I picked my team, John, Finn, Ada, and a small group of survivors who had earned my trust. We scavenged weapons, iron bars, bats, revolvers, knives, even old Molotovs we'd been stockpiling for this moment. I painted our faces with soot for camouflage and sent runners ahead to mark paths and report enemy positions. The attack began at dawn. Fog hung heavy along the canals, red light catching on broken water and twisted metal. I moved like a shadow. eyes sharp, senses sharper. We struck the first nest near the old foundry by the canal. They came at us, dozens of them, but we were ready. Fire, iron, and precision. Every shot, every swing, every strike was calculated. But the dead had evolved. They coordinated. They attacked in formations, flanked us, and drove some of our team back. Finn and I had to fight back to back in a narrow alleyway, cutting through the relentless tide. John had a narrow miss with a screeching monstrosity that leapt from the shadows. Ada's precision with the rifle saved the rear guard more than once. By nightfall, we had cleared the canals and pushed the remaining pockets toward the hospital district. But victory came at a cost. We found a group of survivors trapped in the hospital, among them a young boy, barely 10, clinging to life. I went to carry him to safety, but a mob of dead, larger and smarter than any we had faced, surged from the building. John and Finn fought valiantly, but the boy didn't make it. 1 second he was screaming, the next, gone. And I could do nothing. I remember standing in the alley, blood and fog mixing, smoke curling from my cigarette, and thinking, loss sharpens the mind. It hardens the soul. It carves away weakness. That night, the survivors huddled in the ruins of a factory we had claimed. The boys' screams, or lack thereof, haunted me. I couldn't cry. I couldn't grieve. I made a vow. In this new world, nothing and no one would make me weak again. I drew maps. I marked nests. I labeled patrol routes. I assigned teams to scavenge ammunition and fortify strongholds. Every night, I walked the fog-laden streets alone, testing my perimeter, learning the horde's behaviors. The dead weren't mindless. They were hunters, like us. And to survive, we had to hunt smarter. Then came the message, written in red on a wall, smeared with something I didn't want to think about. Ash Shelby will fall. I laughed. The nights had become a second city of their own, silent but for the occasional moan of the dead. Every street was a gauntlet, every alley a test of skill and instinct. But I was learning. I wasn't just Ash Shelby, the survivor, anymore. I was Ash Shelby, the hunter, and hunters find answers. It began with the notes, scrawled, Blood Street, messages left on doors, walls, and even corpses. Some were warnings, some were taunts, and some led to answers. Ada found the first clue while scouting an abandoned pharmacy near the canal. Inside, a journal, yellowed and water-stained, half-eaten by rats, full of medical notations. The entries mentioned a pestilence, altered blood, and experiments meant to manipulate it. Someone had been testing, learning, and then releasing it. I studied the pages, cigar smoke curling over the map table. My gut told me this wasn't random. This wasn't nature's wrath or divine punishment. This was human. Men like Kavanaugh, like Milligan, men who thought survival was a commodity. But this was something else. Someone had weaponized the dead. I sent scouts to check the old hospital district, the epicenter of the outbreak. Bodies, reports of strange activity, and a horde more intelligent than any we'd seen. They weren't staggering blindly. They organized, coordinated. They even set traps, tripwires fashioned from old wires, dead bodies positioned as obstacles. Someone had taught them, or maybe the plague itself had taught them. I couldn't afford hesitation. I sent John and Finn to reinforce barricades while I took a small strike team to investigate deeper. We moved in silence, knives and revolvers ready, shadows among shadows. And then I saw it, a laboratory, broken vials, ruined notebooks, chemical stains on the walls, and in the center, a cage. Inside it, a figure, pale, half alive, half dead. They weren't fully gone yet. Eyes wide, trembling, I recognized fear. Human fear. I didn't know whether to feel pity or disgust. I didn't. I only thought of survival. I broke the cage open. The figure screamed, and instinctively I raised my revolver, but Ada shook me. "Let them live. They're the key," she whispered. I trusted her judgment. We dragged the figure back to the foundry. Between delirium and fear, he mumbled names, experiments, and locations. He revealed who had been controlling the outbreak: a doctor, a scientist who had survived the war, obsessed with mastering life and death. He'd weaponized the dead to study evolution, pushing them to think, to hunt, to survive. This wasn't just a plague. This was strategy. I made my decision. We would strike next. Not just defend Birmingham, but destroy the source. As we approached the hospital, hundreds surged from the fog, coordinated, relentless, intelligent. I moved like a shadow, cutting through the horde, every swing precise, every shot calculated. John took a creature trying to flank us. Finn covered the rear. Ada, cold and precise, took out threats before they could strike. Hours passed in a blur of smoke, blood, and steel. By dawn, the hospital was ours, but victory was bitter. The figure we had saved, the scientist's assistant, spoke a single line before dying. He's coming. And I knew then that the war wasn't over. The mastermind behind this nightmare wasn't just a name on paper. He was coming to reclaim what he created, and he wouldn't negotiate. The city had changed completely. Birmingham no longer resembled the bustling industrial hub it had been before the fog rolled in. Now, it was a maze of barricades, firelit streets, and silent ruins. But it was ours, my brotherhood, my survivors, and me. And I had learned one crucial truth. In a city like this, power wasn't given. It was taken. The last clue had led us to the outskirts, near the old university laboratories. Reports from the surviving assistants hinted at a mastermind who had weaponized the dead, orchestrating them like pieces on a chessboard. He had elevated the dead from mindless monsters to hunters, strategists, predators, and now he would come for us. I gathered my strike team. Each one knew what we were facing. No hesitation, no mercy. Every step into the university grounds was a calculated risk. Molotovs stacked, revolvers loaded, knives sharpened. The fog was thick that night, curling around the broken spires like a living thing. Shadows moved dead, yes, but smarter than ever. I led the team with the confidence of a man who had survived months of chaos. Every street, every broken wall, every corner was a trap. We expected the dead, but not all of them. The first wave struck near the main hall. They attacked in formations, attempting to cut us off, drive us into kill zones. But we were ready. Fire, steel, and lead met them head on. I moved like a shadow, every swing, every shot, every command precise. John took down 3 with a single swing of a reinforced pipe. Finn covered our rear with cold efficiency. Ada picked off those trying to flank us. Hours passed. We pushed through the corridors, clearing the laboratory floor by floor. And then we found him. The mastermind. A man, gaunt and pale, eyes wild but calculating, standing amidst ruined equipment. Vials of strange chemicals spilled around him, notes scattered on the floor. The smell of decay hung in the air. His creations, the monsters that had terrorized Birmingham, loitered behind him, waiting for his command. "I see you survived, Ash Shelby," he hissed, voice sharp as broken glass. "But do you understand? This city, this chaos, they belong to evolution. To me." I smiled. The fight was brutal. He released a dozen of his most evolved creations at us, and we cut through them, like blades through smoke. But he was clever. He had traps, chemical flares, and an intelligence that rivaled even my own. For every move we made, he countered, forcing us to adapt. It came down to a narrow corridor, our backs to the wall, him facing us with a scalpel glinting in the firelight. I lunged first, brass knuckles smashing into his jaw. He staggered but recovered, swinging the scalpel. Finn tackled him to the floor, and I ended it with the revolver pressed to his temple. One shot. Silence. The mastermind slumped, eyes wide, calculating until the very end, and then nothing. Outside, the horde hesitated. Without his commands, the intelligent dead faltered, confused. I realized something important. Leadership wasn't just for the living. Even the dead needed a master. And now, in this city, that master was me. We returned to the foundry, battered but alive. Survivors cheered, but I didn't celebrate. I lit a cigarette, watching the red fog curl over the canals. Birmingham was ours. The dead, for now, obeyed, or at least hesitated. And humans, well, humans had learned that Ash Shelby was no man to cross. I looked at John, Finn, and Ada, scarred, tired, but loyal. This city bends to whoever's smart enough to take it, I muttered, echoing words I'd said weeks ago. And now she bends to us. The red fog hadn't disappeared. It would never disappear. But we had survived, dominated, and controlled. And in this new world, survival wasn't enough. Dominance was everything. Birmingham was a graveyard, yes, but it was also a kingdom. And I, Ash Shelby, would reign in its ashes. The fog had begun to thin, but the city remained shrouded in a haze of smoke, ruin, and blood. Birmingham was quiet now, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that belonged to the dead, to those who had lost everything and had no hope of getting it back. I walked the streets alone at dawn, brass knuckles in my pocket, revolver at my side, cigar burning low. The canals reflected the red sky, twisted metal, and the remnants of buildings we had burned, barricaded, or claimed. Every corner bore witness to the fights, the betrayals, the slaughter. Every wall, scarred with messages of fear, served as a reminder I had survived, and the city had bent to my will. The survivors, few, strong, loyal, were reorganizing the foundry, reinforcing barricades, rationing supplies, and keeping watch. They didn't look at me with hope. They looked at me with respect, fear, and understanding. That was enough. John came up beside me, wiping soot and blood from his face. "City's quiet. Too quiet," he muttered. I exhaled smoke slowly. "It's quiet because we've won, for now. But quiet doesn't last, John. Never has, never will. Quiet is a trap, a lull before the storm." I had killed, bargained, and bled to make it mine. But the cost was written in every scar across my body, every empty eye staring back at me from the streets, every life we couldn't save. The boy, the men and women caught in rival gang crossfires. Every loss had been fuel for this reign. Every loss had sharpened me. I looked down an alley, cigarette ash drifting into the fog. A lone figure emerged from the shadows, human, alive, afraid. They froze when they saw me, revolver in hand, brass knuckles gleaming, eyes cold and calculating. "You're Ash Shelby," they whispered. I nodded slowly. The figure nodded, then retreated. That was enough. Fear had its uses. I returned to the foundry, watching the sun rise over a ruined, scarred city. Smoke curled into the red-streaked sky. The dead shuffled in distant streets, hesitant now. But the living, those who remained, understood one rule above all: follow me or die. I lit another cigarette, inhaled, and watched over the kingdom I had carved from ash. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't noble. I was Ash Shelby, ruthless, calculating, unstoppable. And in a world gone mad, that was enough. Birmingham was quiet now. Yes, but the silence belonged to me. The red fog had tested the city. It had tested me. And I had survived. I had dominated. And I would continue to do so until every shadow bowed, every street was mine, and every threat, human or undead, learned that in Birmingham, one name ruled above all: Ash Shelby.